Good morning, it's April 29th on a Wednesday, and we're currently delving through a miscellaneous D and B bill, S 326, and we're trying to hopefully get this wrapped up by the end of the week or next week, and we have proposed language in front of us dealing with commercial driver's licenses, and this was a section we passed, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and had to do just with pleasure cars. So we're trying to sync up that same language to commercial drivers. And we have the Vermont Truck Bus Association lobbyist Bill Smith here to testify on this piece of legislation for us. For consideration whether or not we want to do this as D and B bill, but welcome, Bill, to state your name for the record and share your thoughts on this piece of legislation or proposed legislation.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. So I am Bill Smith. I'm the attorney and lobbyist for the Vermont Truck and Bus Association. We're friendly local freight haulers in the state of Vermont. And we took a look at this after the chair asked me to take a look at it. And I can share with you some of what I responded to him on the 17th of April to the chair and to Deputy Commissioner Russo. It said, short answer here is my take is it's substantially the same as passenger cars. The intent is the same, and most likely enforcement will be the same as the existing passenger vehicle language in 1095B. You can see that they took that language from 1095B and put it into the commercial truck language. Historically, it was being treated slightly different for commercial vehicles originally because they're addressed differently and they have federal requirements on them as well. But I think it makes a lot of sense to have it be consistent with passenger cars because those truck drivers one day are passenger car drivers the next day. It might as well it'd be good for them to understand they're playing by the same rules and enforcement is the same way. And I would say that you don't want someone texting in a car. You really don't want them texting in a 40-ton truck car. Unless you're doing it in the manner prescribed in statute, which is basically getting out of everybody else's way, stopping your vehicle and dealing with whatever you might have to do, unless it's an emergency or you see the wrong way driver coming down the interstate. By all means, contact law enforcement however you can. But we saw that recently in December, didn't we? On the 9th. So I would say the position of the Truck and Bus Association is this makes sense to do. And a lot of this bill is like that, which is as it should be. It's the D&B miscellaneous bill. It's not supposed to be controversial. It's supposed to be figuring stuff out, making it better, and making it work better for all of us. And I will put it on the record. I think that Department of Motor Vehicles is the most useful part of state government. Okay. I'm not just saying that because the commissioner and vice commissioner are in the room. I mean,
So cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think this was purely an oversight on our part when we did it 2 or 3 years ago.
2023, I think you need a passenger vehicle one.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. And at that time, if it was put on our radar, we would have done it then. But
there's everyone kind of has in their mind that truckers must have special GPS and special phones. No, they don't. I mean, you can buy that package of commercial GPS software if you want to make sure they don't go over the notch, but you can also read the road signs. Yeah. Crazy as that may be. So that's kind of all I got for you on this one. Any questions for me?
Yeah, and is there any questions? It's pretty straightforward where we're going to work.
We talked about these signs yesterday, and I know if you can't see 5 or 6 signs, you shouldn't be on the road. But if you can't speak English or something, probably you can't read them. But just a sidebar to question here. Are we at a dramatic shortage of CDL drivers in the state of Vermont right now? And has that been a drop the last few years? We got some testimony the other day about them having 25% less applicants or a drop in CDL drivers. Is that accurate, Bill?
I would say, I don't know if it's 25%, but it certainly is going down. And the other part is the ones that are there are another year older every year. Your people driving trucks, whether it's local delivery or long haul, I think the average age was 55 or 57 a couple of years ago. So we're I was that age a couple of years ago myself, so you keep getting older and without having the training in place, without having the drivers available that want to drive. We're really close to that tipping point. It's a lot like housing in Vermont. You may be past the tipping point. You don't feel it at the time you go over the top of the hill and head down the other side, but I think you're already there. And I think 5 years from now, you're really gonna be freaking out. And there, I said it.
So we need John Bruno to extend his driving career.
We'd like John to keep driving as long as he can, keep it on the road safely.
I'll remind him of that.
Yeah, tell him to head back west again.
Representative, what?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So just, I'm looking at the language in this proposal, and just to give me a little bit of like big picture. So this is language that is proposed by DMV, supported by your association to put into the DMV bill. And we have language already in statute for no texting while driving pleasure cars. We're just matching commercial vehicles up to that.
Right. If you did a side by side with 1095B, which I did, suggested that you have Council Leonard do, but this is where the language comes from, in my estimation.
This was more of a technical thing from the law enforcement standpoint. This had to do with actually going to court and that it was a high bar to prove whether or not it was in somebody's hand. So this made it easier for law enforcement to go to court to issue the fine. So it wasn't necessarily handheld. It was more of a technical thing for courts. You didn't have to prove it was in one's hand at the percent. So
Are we seeing, a lot of truckers texting while driving in the state of Vermont?
I would suggest to you that at any intersection in the state of Vermont, at any time of the day, you will see someone texting in their vehicle, their passenger vehicle going by you. I had it happen on the way here this morning. I have it happen every day in Montpelier and other towns. So people do it. It's really lucky that they're not killing more kids out there. Do truckers do it? I'm not going to say they don't, but they at least let's make it consistent for enforcement here, so that everyone knows what to expect when those blue lights go off behind you. What to expect. And it's consistent across the board for all vehicle drivers, because all vehicles have the same risk to the general public when that individual is breaking the law.
And I suppose you could argue that trucks have a bigger risk because they are just bigger.
Yeah, it's 20 times 20 times bigger.
Representative Thomas.
Yeah, it's sort of piggyback on that. I think my eyes were opened up maybe 3 years ago, meeting some of the bigger trucking firms, how they monitor their drivers, like extensively with cameras or other, monitoring devices, looking for speeding, looking for hard braking.
They can monitor that directly off the vehicle itself, and they do have cameras in the cab pointing at the drivers.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, including insurance purposes, but it's also, I get, is that big brotherly? Yeah, it is. Is it a good idea? Yeah, it is. That's the way they should be doing it.
Andrew Collar, Commissioner Campaign for the record. I would just piggyback on what Bill said. I've reviewed a few corrections recently that the trucks have had cameras in them from the company standpoint, and those have been instrumental in proving that the driver was not at fault and that it was outside factors. And I think the trucking industry is here in Vermont, and some of the bigger ones outside of Vermont are moving in that direction. And it's been helpful for the drivers, for the companies. I think it's building a good reputation. Not that they have a good reputation for, but I think it's building that reliance on the hard facts, and I think the drivers are doing their best. And there's some kind of crazy situations right now that are influencing truck accidents that are outside the driver's control. Camera and software systems have been extremely helpful in improving those cases. And moments.
Guess while we have you in the seat there, speaking of smugglers knots, I don't know if you testified on this, but our fine for violating going over the mountain increased quite significantly. You have thoughts on that?
10 times?
And then, well, depends on if you impeded traffic or not. Could be
10 times what it currently is, I think it's good, but,
Yeah.
Or it might be 20.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just, not to be too flip about it, but if you've ever driven through Smuggler's Knots, you folks have put in legislation at the request of the motor vehicle enforcement community many times, dealing with Smuggler's Knots in particular. I mean, there's the latest one before another fine increase, for example, a couple years ago, he said, well, let's make them put it some chicane you have to get through. And if you get through that, you can get through the big rocks up on the top. Well, people just blow over the top of those nice little fiberglass whips there out past the ski area and stuff. I mean, there's signs, there's flashing lights, there's signs on 89 when you come north, you know. They'll have to they need a bigger sign now because it says $2,400 fine. I don't know if there's enough room for the number of the fine on the sign they put on 89 every year. The last couple of years since that got increased to that level, it said the signs are so clear, you will get stuck. And we can, one of the things you need to think about when you're setting your fines, there's other items that someone has to pay when they get stuck between some big rocks up there. And I'm thinking about mostly, since I see that the towing industry lobbyists, here's the tow is not going to be a cheap one, yanking you out of some big boulders in the notch. It ain't. It's going to be, I'm going to say it's going to be at least $10,000 to haul you out. It would be a rough, guesstimated, I guess. It's going to cost you a lot of money to get hauled out of there. And now you're going to pay a big fine. Well, who's going to pay that? A trucking companies, say it's a commercial, it won't be one of those good Vermont companies, it's going to be someone from Arkansas, right? Who hopefully the driver speaks English and has a current CPL and medical card. And they're going to go in there and they're going to also, they're going to have their $10,000 tow and they're going to have their $10,000 fine, right? Whatever it is,
Repeat traffic is 20.
and they're gonna, if you do it again, that's that's one's the stupid tax, one's the you're really stupid tax, I guess you can do it twice, but I can make it, I mean, we're all kind of think of that. My GPS tells me that, because it's on their phone, they're looking at their phone, hopefully it's not handheld, but it's over connected to something. And it goes through, this road goes right to Stowe. I can make it there. We've all heard the arguments, but I think that driver's getting fired. He's losing his, on top of all that. Well, it's a pretty, well, is this gonna work? Where we're down, how many did you have last year? 6? One.
Yeah.
Well, now we'll get to really go.
The guy that breaks it, representative Casey wants him in here.
He does it twice. We need to talk to him.
Yeah, that's what it does twice. Just, you have him testify, I guess that'd be great, but I mean, at least this way you're not making it a crime. You're not, they're gonna have some repercussions outside of what you do. It's just here's one more way of doing this. So is that enough? Is that not too flippant about it? But I mean, come on, people, stop doing that.
Thank you. So just on this topic, so you referenced truckers using GPS, and I understand that there are some GPS systems specifically for truckers that route them so that they're not going over Smuggler's Notch, or they're not going through a little town when there's a better, bigger road to go on. But that's not consistent for all truckers. It's just available for some companies.
Available if a company particularly wants to have that for consistency with its operators, then they do it. I mean, but it's not very commonly used by our members.
It's not, okay.
Because these cell phones that we all carry they are really good.
Yeah.
All space, They will show you where the road is. They'll show you where there's a traffic accident, right?
Yeah.
Programs out there that do that. I mean, but they're not gonna tell you what's the weight limit on the road. They're not gonna,
And if there's and CDL drivers are filing their routes in Vermont if they're overweight.
over dimension, if they're in at those criteria. Which are they're not a conventional vehicle.
Okay,
Not a-
but if they're conventional, they don't have to file a route, they don't have to get special permission, and they're free to go over the notch if they are being directed that way, and
Yes,
nothing's stopping them.
nothing is connecting into those GPS programs that says those things. You know, I mean, maybe they will someday, but again, no, most people don't use that. They use whatever's on your smartphone.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like if, with GPS, if there were a way for the state of Vermont to say, in the summer, do not offer, or whatever, do not offer this route over the Smuggler's Notch, that would be beneficial to drivers.
It would be beneficial,
Yeah.
but mandating it when we have one. It used to be historically, it was like 5 to 10 every year, somebody built there. Now it's just one. I would say those extra things you've done are kind of working, but this year you could have 4 or 5 of them up there. I mean, you could. It's just, you never know. Somebody comes down out of Canada, makes a delivery up on the north side of 15, and I don't know. Because they're looking at how many miles it is, because miles equals fuel, miles equals hours of service in their minds. Now, we all know that if you try to go into the notch, your hours of service, you can forget, because you're going to be, 8 hours getting out of there. I don't have much sympathy for them, as you can probably tell, and neither does the general industry in the state. They're wasting everybody's time.
Representative Burke?
You think there would be like some kind of communication between truckers, don't ever go over the bridge.
There is. All the ones I know had that conversation 45 years ago. Don't go that way. I mean, the rocks weren't put there by the government to make it difficult.
Yeah.
They sort of decided they wanted to put a paved road through there, I think in 40s or 50s. I mean, it's always been like sort of that smuggler route, the whole idea of that thing, Canadian whiskey coming down,
Oh, yeah.
but who knows if that's real or not.
Good morning. I'm sorry I missed all the excitement this morning. You draw a big crowd.
They voted the bill out already.
Excellent. Excellent. Get back to work. From what I understand, you already commented on your section, got into yourself with a bunch of different conversations. What was the original section on that piece, Damon, that we were originally talking about, the texting and handheld?
Yes, so
What was,
language.
that was what, number 20, number?
It was actually not a section.
Number 18.
Proposal amendment.
Oh,
The proposed language. I sent over a draft of it this morning.
which I did see, which you're gonna also see.
That would it would add to the existing general prohibition on texting while driving a commercial vehicle. By adding new language, including when the prohibition does not apply and where the prohibition applies. So it would include a public highway in Vermont or a location that is either temporarily or permanently open to the public for the general circulation of vehicles. And then it would create exceptions for the activation or deactivation of hands-free use. The use of a global positioning or navigation system that is installed by the vehicle manufacturer or securely mounted in the vehicle, or instances where the operator has moved the vehicle to the side of or off the public highway and stopped the vehicle with or without the motor running in a location where the vehicle can safely and lawfully remain stationary. The one thing that I would note that's different between this and the language for operators of regular motor vehicles is in the statute for operators of regular motor vehicles, there's specifically an exception for hands-free use, which would include voice texting. So texting by voice where you're not manually holding or operating your device, but instead it's reading the message that you get and you're replying with a message to be sent using voice commands. So
Is allowed.
that's allowed for regular motor vehicles. It is in the language that was sent over by DMV that was not included. So I'm not sure if that was the intent or if that was an oversight, but I wanted to highlight that as just the language is a little different from the underlying law, but this seems to exclude that hands-free use. Potentially, texting is defined in the language as the reading or manual composing or sending of electronic communications. Manual means with the hands, so potentially you could read that to exclude hands-free use, but it seems a little ambiguous to me. Just a concern that there could be difficulty in the future figuring out that, and if the intent is to exclude any texting unless you're in one of those situations, or whether it would be to include hands-free use as an exception as permitted.
Representative Keiser, you have something?
So this language has, does it says that it must be stationary. Is that the requirement?
So there are 3 instances when you're allowed to that are not included. One is activating or deactivating hands-free use. So that could, mean reaching over to press the button to turn on the hands-free operation or to connect the Bluetooth to the vehicle. Provided that you're not using a hand to actually hold the device, it has to be securely mounted in the vehicle. The second is using your GPS. So if you're pressing the GPS, whether it's the vehicle's internal GPS or your device that's securely mounted. And then the third instance is if you've pulled off and the vehicle is stationary.
So the first 2 you can do while it's moving.
Yes. There's also an exception for texting law enforcement. That's in the existing law. Or other emergency services if it's necessary to communicate with them.
It would seem to me as if you wouldn't want to have even a voice text going on when you're driving because you still got to read the damn. Oh, well, nowadays you can hear it, can't you?
Right. So the way the hands-free use definition is, it's defined as the use of a portable electronic device without utilizing either hand by employing an internal feature of or an attachment to the device with the commercial motor vehicle. So originally that language came out of the days when we had Bluetooth headsets and or speakerphone, and obviously technology is continuing to progress with voice recognition and so forth.
Just one of the things that's running through my head commercially, truck drivers usually have a headset and they're working that all the time to know where their loads are going. It's used in business, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm fine. Thanks.
I'm a little behind. I mean, DMV requesting update. Please go ahead, Representative Tuck.
So Damien, it's fair to say
I wonder if we
this,
should switch.
this just parallels exactly what non-commercial drivers.
It does, except it's not entirely clear if you can use whether hands-free use is considered an exception from the prohibition on texting. I think you can make the argument under the definition of texting. But it's the underlying statute 1095B. It provides. Okay. 1095B provides in its exceptions that the prohibitions of this section shall not apply to hands-free use, activation and deactivation of hands-free use, when use of the portable electronic device is necessary to communicate with law enforcement or emergency circumstances or service personnel under emergency circumstances, or in response to a direction or order from law enforcement, the use of an ignition interlock device, the use of GPS or navigation system, or when the operator has moved the vehicle to the side of the road and has halted. So what's not in the language that you see in front of you is the hands-free use and the ignition interlock. You can't have a CDL if you need an ignition interlock. And then the hands-free use is the only other piece that is not in there. So it's just highlighting that there is a difference between the two. And while the texting could arguably be read to not encompass the use of like a voice to text system, it might be clearer if you provided the hands-free use, if that's your intent and if that's what the department is, intending. So I can't speak for the department. It's just in looking at the statute side by side, that was a clear difference that came up.
It struck me that, I don't know, this seems to have been slightly tweaked a little bit, which kind of points out that it's existing language in for pleasure cars or passenger vehicles that it doesn't apply to hands-free use. And then it also doesn't apply to these other things like activating your system just by pushing a button, things like that. So the question, I did raise the question, why are we going to treat them differently? And if the same thing where, I can talk to my iPhone and say, I don't know, what's that about? Hey Siri, text Nanette. And that's my wife. And I say, when that says, what do you want to tell her? It says, I do this all the time. It says, what time's dinner, honey? Question mark. And then it goes and says, Nanette has responded. Do you want me to read it to you? So that says, whenever you get here and cook it. So it's absolutely, within the last 2 weeks, that's happened.
Real life.
Yeah. Warmer weather, I'm the girl guy, that's how it goes down. But anyway, so it's doing it right. Literally, she's on silent, but Siri is trying to say, should I send this? No, cancel. It's everywhere, it's scanning me. I'm all nervous on my face getting flushed. So no, I think that if you can do that in the car and be on the road, how is it any different than talking to someone in the vehicle next to you? It's really not. So I would like to, I guess, maybe hear from the DMV folks, is there a specific reason related to commercial vehicles where we need to say you can't do hands-free use? Well, you can activate it, you can run your GPS, but we're not going to let you, I guess, talk. What's stands for that?
Yeah, so there's really no issue with us putting in the hands-free portion. I'm not sure why that was left out of it. We sent it, so it's on us. But from our enforcement team, talking with them, and just, I've worked more myself, dealing with texting, we're not jamming people up for hands-free.
You're just gonna force it.
Yeah, there's no way to enforce it. It's I think we just add hands-free texting, but it's not really texting law. Yeah. I think the distinction Daniel is made was it is two separate things. So whether it's we're fine with the language being in there. If it's left out, it's the same outcome, I think. With the physical manually holding your phone to text versus voice. We're fine having language to match 1095B. That's helpful. To the extent of enforcement wise. We don't use it's possible.
So sing along to a song.
Exactly.
Representative White?
In terms of hands-free, that seems to be a safe way to use your phone while driving. I would rather see hands-free versus, I mean, allowing them to physically punch their phone to get for GPS navigating while they're driving. That's kind of worrisome. Same with texting a law enforcement, texting 911. I'd rather that be hands-free than a driver using their hands to do that while they're on the road. Seems safer to me. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Well, my thought is that if we line this up as closely as we can with what passenger cars can, then that becomes a bigger discussion, I guess.
Yeah.
Allow, these other activities that distract you from your primary job in the car, which is going safe down the highway.
So I think I think the sentiment of the, Representative Burkhurst.
Well, I was just gonna say, there's also the issue, like, names come up on your screen and you press, calling somebody and you just press the button when you're talking. I mean, it's all very slippery slope kind of thing.
But I think that the sentiment, and maybe we can direct Damien, is, my understanding of this original version that we had was it was syncing it up to the pleasure cars. And so within that, I think we should probably direct Damien to allow the hands-free portion of it. So it is identical. I mean, again, you're talking about enforcement. It's virtually impossible. So if that's the comfort level of the a bill, yeah, go ahead. I would say put that in. And I think everything else is straightforward. So with that, is the comfort level of the committee to submit this in the bill? Fine, yeah. No, we were just.
Understand Patty was all set there.
Yeah.
Question. Okay. Thank you. So then I guess thank you very much for joining us. And we're gonna move to the next topics. Damon, you've got that?
Yeah.
All right. I'm pretty sure, judging by the numbers under that Deidre and Rachel are online and joining us online, and
We're up to past two.
Here we go.
you never see that number grow, but boy, if you make a mistake, you hear about it. So somewhere they're watching. Somewhere they're watching or listening in the ethers, because boy, you go into the wrong area, you all of a sudden, bang. But I apologize to Deidre and Rachel that we cut them off the last time they were here, and they were in the middle of testimony, and have to go back to exactly that. We have a few other pieces that we want to be able to touch on as well. So welcome back to committee. I don't remember exactly where we left off. I apologize that we sort of cut it short. That was a hugely important day for the committee last Thursday. So I'm sorry that we had to cut you off at lunch, and we got plenty of time to make sure that doesn't happen this time. So welcome back.
Great, thank you, and no problem at all. Just for the record, I'm Deirdre Ritzer. I'm the Mobile Sources Section Chief at the Air Quality and Climate Division in the Department of Environmental Conservation. And also we're joined with Rachel Stevens, who's the attorney supporting the Air Division. So I think there were just a couple more points that I wanted to make. I think we were talking about impacts associated with the potential move to a biennial emissions inspection. So I'll just make those points. And then we can, jump back into more questions. So the first one was I wanted to discuss the cost of repairs. I don't think we had gotten to this part in the testimony. We would expect a change to.
Sorry,
the
Deidre, just a sec.
Yes.
I think on Thursday you had a PowerPoint that we were following along with. I didn't see that we ever received that. Did we have that on our- Did you have a PowerPoint?
Yes, Deirdre had a PowerPoint.
No, we didn't have a PowerPoint. There was a handout.
Letter
Last Thursday, it's in there.
Yeah.
Under detail.
It was a handout. It was a,
with the chart.
I remember looking. Oh, it's on Thursday. Okay, sorry.
the graph on the collection on the downward side.
Yeah, it's 3 pages. Think you're fine,
Sorry.
No, no worries.
Get a whisper from her once in a while.
So looking at the cost of repairs, we would expect a change to a biennial frequency to increase the cost of necessary vehicle repairs, which can often, So regular inspections support early diagnosis and timely repairs, which can often prevent more costly repairs. For example, a poorly performing spark plug can cause the engine to misfire, which can quickly degrade the performance of the catalytic converter if the repair is delayed. So a spark plug repair is relatively inexpensive, while a catalytic converter repair, in addition to a spark plug repair, can be expensive. Additionally, delaying repairs can negatively impact warranty coverage. A vehicle's emissions warranty coverage is based on the vehicle's age and mileage. If an emissions issue arises near the end of your vehicle's warranty, delaying repairs until an inspection could mean missing out on warranty coverage. Also, if driving with the check engine light on for an extended amount of time leads to more significant damage, emissions warranties can be denied on the basis of neglect and improper maintenance. I think those were my last 2 points. Happy to take questions if there are any more about the emissions inspection. And if not, we can turn it over to Rachel to discuss S326 and that limited use specialty vehicles.
Deidre, I did have a question that I had a note here that you had said that the EPA had identified other issues with our inspection process and that you were working on them. But I wasn't 100% certain on what the answer was to what some of the other items that they had concerns with the inspection process. And maybe that wasn't in your testimony. Maybe that was just one of the questions I had written down or caught in one of the comments. Did you have something on that?
Yeah, it wasn't really described in our testimony. I breezed over it. But the 2 additional areas where we were deficient, there was the time extension waiver, which has been resolved. But there is also an on-road testing component that we've been talking with EPA on, and we have a good path forward for that. But they do require a certain number of vehicles in between, like the inspection cycle, so it's kind of off cycle. Either have an emissions test or they do like roadside testing, which can be set up with some roadside equipment that kind of shoots a beam across the lane traveled, and you can detect emissions plumes coming from vehicles to see kind of like in use what the emissions of vehicles are on the roads in Vermont. We're working on a different kind of proposal. It hasn't been fully fleshed out, but it's going to be looking at the emissions, the OBD, which is onboard diagnostics, information from like the state of Vermont fleet vehicles, because the fleet vehicles, we already collect the telematics data. So I think that is what we're going to work with EPA on doing. So it's not going to be interruptive to anybody, and it's really a voluntary item. And the other deficiency is registration denial. Our inspection program is enforced through the sticker-based program, which really requires law enforcement to take note of inspection stickers as the way of kind of enforcing the program, where EPA regulations require that we have registration denial. So you would have to get your inspection first in order to comply with the requirements to register your vehicle. And if you don't have a passing inspection, then you could be denied registration. So those are the few deficiencies. I don't know if Rachel wants to add.
I was just going to point out that I think we had talked a little bit about that registration denial concept when somebody asked about Connecticut. So Connecticut has a biennial test frequency to their inspections, but one of the reasons why their program is more successful is because they do have the registration denial component for their enforcement.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. It's a timely topic because one of the things we're considering is mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles. And in that language, proposed language is if you don't get your inspection, which is when you read the mileage, you can't re-register your car. Now, my understanding is for vehicles today, to register for the first time, you have to have an inspection, and I'm looking just to make sure I'm corrected. But after that, you can re-register without any evidence that it's been inspected. But today, the DMV, with their new computer system, can easily identify a vehicle coming for re-registration, whether it's had an updated inspection. And so the EPA has sort of picked up on this, I think you're implying. And is it that they want to make sure before you do a new registration, there's an inspection, or that inspection is verified at re-registration too?
Do you want to take that, Deirdre? I mean,
yeah, I think it's technically both. But I think EPA would be willing to work with us because I think registration renewal makes a lot of sense. It could be a better place for to check for inspection at that point. But I do know oftentimes when you're purchasing a new vehicle, the vehicle's already inspected. So for new vehicles, I think it's typically also pretty easy because they usually are sold with an inspection sticker. It might be a little different for the used market. But yeah, I think renewal of registration is definitely a good starting point. We would have to talk to EPA to confirm that they would be okay if we didn't also include like new first time registration.
Okay.
Represent what?
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify for the committee, inspections nationwide, not all states require auto inspections. Is that correct?
Correct. There are 28 states plus the District of Columbia that require emissions inspections.
Okay, and Vermont is one of the states that require emissions inspections because of our geographic location and kind of
Yes.
the importance of how our emissions are traveling to other states and countries. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
states in our, all the states in our region, have inspections because of the, the density and our closeness. And then other states that have what's called non-attainment. So if they're, have poor air quality, they're required to have emissions inspections as well.
And so am I correct in assuming that those states that require emissions inspections are requiring inspections at the time of registration or re-registration? And Vermont is an outlier and like that's an issue of contention for the EPA because we are not currently requiring proof of inspection upon registration.
That's a good question. Is a bit of a mix, and I'm just looking at my notes. Looks like maybe 26 of the jurisdictions require registration denial, and it looks like 7 areas do not. I know the math doesn't add up because we just said. So I'm not entirely sure. Some, and it might be that, I'm not sure why that math's not adding up. I can follow up with you on the exact numbers, but the vast majority are registration denial.
Okay. And would you all be supportive of requiring proof of inspection upon registration?
EPA is basically requiring us to do so. So it would lead to potentially getting an approved state implementation plan.
And what does that do for us? An approved state implementation plan?
I mean, that's really important. We're one of the only states that doesn't EPA has not approved our state implementation plan. And it's important to be able to, so if EPA comes to the conclusion that it can't approve Vermont state implementation plan, it has a couple options. It could deny our approval, and then the federal government creates its own plan. So that's called a federal implementation plan. They rarely do that because the federal government doesn't want to take over state programs unless there's like dire need to do that. But that would be probably the most extreme outcome if we can't, right now we're in communication with the EPA to try to figure out, and DMV to try to negotiate a path forward. So I don't think that that's imminent. But that would be an adverse consequence if we can't reach agreement on a path forward. But as Deirdre mentioned, there may be some flexibility in terms of like a phased approach, but we'd have to see what EPA would agree to. But what's difficult is this is part of what's in the federal regulations, so there's not a lot of wiggle room for us. But that answers your question.
Thank you.
Representative Whalen?
So could you think about it this way, that if there is no approved plan right now, that this provides an opportunity for us to imagine something that we don't have to make the case that we don't have to make the case that we're for defending why we're changing something because we don't have an approved plan, right? So we can kind of start with what we want. Is that fair to say? And does that offer advantages?
I think there's opportunity for, if we had a program that met the federal minimum, then I do think we could explore options. Like, I think what we were trying to convey in the context of this conversation is that it would be very difficult to make the case for a biennial frequency if we're also deficient in other ways. But if we could demonstrate that we are meeting the federal minimums, then there are options for states to explore inspections, like, for example, biennial frequency. So that's why Connecticut was an example of a state where, because they have met the federal minimums in other ways, they have changed and adapted their inspection program in state-specific ways, if that makes sense.
Okay, true for is.
So what are the other minimum criteria that we would be judged by that would put us, how do we get to be looked at in the same way that Connecticut is? This is what I'm asking.
Well, part of it is related to meeting what's called the federal emissions performance standard. So there's some flexibility in designing a program, but the program as a whole has to meet certain emissions reduction requirements. And so, for example, and Deirdre, feel free to jump in, but for example, a state might have flexibility in the number of model years that are covered in their inspection program, but you'd have to demonstrate the emissions, reductions that would come from that. So, for example, in Connecticut, they inspect more vehicles than we do in Vermont. And so they can demonstrate more emissions reductions because of the age of the vehicles that they inspect and the fact that they have registration denial, and then that allows them to do the biennial test frequency. Some other like non-optional things is, you must enforce your program. So we have to demonstrate how the enforcement takes place, and registration denial is one aspect of enforcement that's kind of required in the federal program. Deirdre, do you want to add anything to kind of so in general, when we're designing a program, we want to make sure we're ensuring emissions reduction. So if, for example, you're going to take an action that would increase emissions in one way, such as moving from annual to biennial inspection, you would need to find another way to potentially reduce emissions.
Offset that, yeah. So how about things like transit? Does that count? How about walkable communities? Does land use, land use measures, do those count? I mean, these are all criteria that we used in our climate action plan. Is there a way to look at this in a non-siloed way so that it's not only through transportation criteria, or is that allowed?
Not in the inspection and maintenance context. So because vehicles are the largest source of emissions for most states, these federal inspection requirements are specifically for the vehicles that operate, on the highway in our state. So while those other ways to reduce air pollution are effective, it wouldn't be relevant to meeting the performance standard under the inspection program.
Thank you.
Deirdre, do you want to add to that? You're our technical person.
No,
so.
I don't think so. I think you hit upon like the biggest adjustments that could be made to kind of offset emissions.
But we don't get credit for those. Currently, is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I think in Vermont we have our inspection is kind of below average in a lot of ways. Our inspection program is kind of below average in a lot of ways when we compare to other states. We inspect much fewer vehicle model years than other states do. We had an emissions waiver, time extension waiver in place for many years. That was obviously that's been resolved. And yeah, enforcement is not consistent. And so I think there's some, EPA has several reasons
so maybe identified. Someday we could get there, but not now.
I do think we have an opportunity to. We've had really good communications with EPA. And yeah, I think there is an opportunity to, to get to an approvable SIP now.
Is this, are you in conversation with the, the treasurer's office on climate action goals or anything like that? I mean, this is how we measure our greatest source of emissions. climate action plan is to produce those, and they
Yeah,
have
I mean,
various
that's-
ways to do that. Are we there yet, or are we on a pathway to maybe being able to do that? And we're also undergoing a lot of permit reform across the state. I know AOT has been part of that, and trying to get the different parts of state government to kind of talk to each other better and work more in lockstep. So I'm just throwing this out there as a great example of trying to meet our climate goals in tandem with our land use goals, in tandem with making life more affordable and convenient for more Vermonters. And all of that. I think all of this is interconnected. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great point. And actually Deirdre's in the program that I work on, we do implement the climate action, the rules that were adopted to improve emissions from vehicles. So that is a program that Deirdre's the Air Quality and Climate Division implements. So we work closely on those matters. And inspections are really about making sure that the vehicles that are on the road are actually meeting those emission standards that they're supposed to. So making sure they're operating properly, that they're not malfunctioning. So this is related in that it does, an effective inspection program does reduce, air pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions, and ensures that vehicles are operating at their, maximum potential.
And I would also mention that I did work quite closely as part of with I guess it was the Climate Councils. It's kind of drilled down, but it was a sub work group on transportation.
Yeah, that's a big part of our work as well.
Representative Burke.
Yeah, thanks for all this information. So I mean, I'm asking, in the years and the years when we had quite a few conversations with Megan O'Toole about this, and that was, I think, when we decided to go to the 16-year limit. And were we in compliance before that? Or, I mean, was that, and I remember we had the waiver program too. Is that what sort of threw us out of compliance, or have we never been compliant?
Well, EPA has never approved the state program, but I believe that the 16 model year, the move from the 1996 and vehicles to 16 model year, I believe that we did do the modeling. Is that correct, Deirdre, for that?
Yes.
And we did meet the federal performance standard with that change. So that is an approvable change. That's an example of a change that continued to have the program meet the performance standard. So that in and of itself wouldn't be a basis for not approving the SIP.
Okay, but so just sort of remind me again, because so in order to meet the standards, we'd have to have better enforcement, for one thing, correct? And then what else could we do? I know you mentioned it, but I'm just trying to remember what you were.
I think that the registration denial proposal that we were talking about, or some form of that, I think would be that would probably be the biggest aspect that we could change. And again, why this was relevant to biennial inspection is because but it's not a hard no on moving to a biennial test frequency as long as we can meet that ultimate standard. And so by implementing registration denial, it makes it more likely that a biennial frequency could be a workable solution for Vermont because of the way that it would offset the emissions.
But even if we did that without the biennial inspection, would that matter?
The EPA assumes an annual test frequency, and that's kind of the gold standard. So yeah, they're not pushing for that. I think that was us trying to be responsive to the committee's interest in the topic.
Thank you.
Okay. So unless there's more questions about the 3-page piece they were testifying on before, we're going to talk a little bit about S326 and some of the provisions. I'm not sure who's up.
I can walk through some high level. So I just wanted to mention that Deirdre and I were given an opportunity to provide edits on the draft. And so the bill draft before you does incorporate the line edits that we had recommended. I did want to mention that in general, the Air Quality Division has been generally trying to discourage exempting any vehicles from emissions inspections because inspections, as we mentioned, are important to identify higher polluting vehicles. But there's, I don't think we're going to take a position on the proposal, and we did make our edits in the draft, and those are reflected in S326. I did want to flag a couple important points just for the committee, just for awareness. So importantly, the exemption from the emissions inspections that's currently in place for the limited, I forget what the phrase is, but the limited specialty vehicles, that does not exempt a vehicle from state and federal requirements to comply with the latest emission standards. So the Federal Clean Air Act requires all engines and vehicles to be covered by a certificate of conformity, either issued by EPA or California, demonstrating that all emissions requirements are met before they can enter into commerce. And in Vermont, as you know, new vehicles must be certified to California's emission standards. So just wanted to be clear that just because a vehicle doesn't need to get an inspection, it's still required to meet emission standards. So just wanted to clarify that for the committee. And EPA has, and this is in the DMV legislative report that was provided for, I think back in December or January. So EPA does consider these types of kind of kit cars or package cars to be motor vehicles under the Clean Air Act. So EPA has guidance that's talked about these kind of used or rebuilt vehicles as still needing to be covered. So just wanted to clarify that for the committee. I also wanted to mention, kind of along the same lines, that an exemption from an emissions inspection does not exempt a vehicle from state and federal tampering prohibitions under the Clean Air Act. So state and federal law prohibit anyone from altering the configuration of an engine or emission control equipment beyond the installation instructions provided by the manufacturer. This is what's known as tampering, and it's prohibited, as I mentioned, in state and federal law. So these prohibitions would still be in place even if these vehicles are exempted from emissions inspection. So that's all I wanted to offer, just with that additional context.
Representative Couch has a question for you.
So
What you just said, because she kind of faded out and then came back.
I think when she gets close to the
Yeah,
camera.
I'm
sorry about that.
yeah. Can you
Yeah.
I think if you stay a little bit further away from the screen, it's better.
Okay, further away.
Yeah, can you just repeat what you just said about the emissions?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that just because a vehicle is exempt from the emissions inspection itself, the vehicle is still subject to the applicable emission standard for that vehicle. So for a new vehicle to be sold in Vermont, it has to meet the California emission standard. So if for example, a small volume manufacturer is selling a vehicle into the state, an exemption from emissions inspection wouldn't exempt that vehicle from the requirement to meet those emission standards. Okay. And then similarly, an exemption from emissions inspection does not exempt a vehicle from the tampering prohibitions, which is the prohibition from altering the emission control system of a vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Couch?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the testimony we had on these particular vehicles, their engines that come out of California, they meet the standards, but they don't have the capability of providing, diagnostic information that you would have at an inspection. So our bill right now, the way it's written, would allow these specialty vehicles to be registered with a limit of 12 per year maximum. And so even though they need to still meet the requirements, our bill says they don't need to have inspection. And is that throwing your program off, or you're just pointing out that that it doesn't give them permission not to meet the standards? It's just that we're not measuring those few vehicles.
Yeah, I think the most important aspect of what you just shared is that there's a limitation of, only 12 per year. Because I think we really want to, as I said, the Air Division like highly discourages exempting vehicle types from inspections because the inspection is how we know and ensure that a vehicle is actually complying with those requirements. So, yeah, I don't think that we're objecting. It's just stating for the record that the requirements still apply, whether or not we're actively checking those vehicles. But Deirdre, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, and I don't have a full understanding of exactly what you just brought up regarding, the engines coming from California, but not having the onboard diagnostic system, which is required of new vehicles federally and by California. So if that's the case, there seems like there might be a problem there. But I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess my example was the one person who said, hey, this is the vehicle we'd like to register in Vermont. But if we go forward with this, it doesn't mean that they're the only ones who could provide these vehicles. They could come from really anywhere, but there'd be a limit of only 12 per year of this particular type. And I hear what you're saying. Hey, that doesn't mean they don't have to meet the emission standards, but with a limited amount allowed into Vermont, it isn't necessarily going to throw the inspection program off or be a reason the EPA wouldn't, continue to approve our program. And then getting back to what we talked about before, if we were to ensure every vehicle is being inspected, that would do far more to get us into compliance versus not meeting those requirements.
Correct. Yeah. And this bill has come a long way in terms of being something that, again, I don't think that we're opposing or supporting. But I do think the fact that it tracks with the exhibition use vehicle type and it's limited to 12, I think has been a big improvement in the bill from our perspective.
Thank you.
Representative Burke and then Representative Burke.
But that's 12 per year.
Yeah.
So over 10 years, you have a lot more vehicles. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, that's true. We're not in a position to object, but as I mentioned, I do think that we would discourage exempted vehicles.
But could we mandate that they get an emissions inspection, even though they don't have the diagnostic ability to test?
Well, I think this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing because, we're saying, well, if you want to exempt from inspection, that's a choice, but these vehicles would still need to meet the emission standards. And I think there's some concern that manufacturers that might want to take advantage of this are intending to actually introduce into commerce vehicles that are not going to meet the emission standard requirements. But there's no way for us to know that without an emissions inspection. So there is some risk involved.
But we could say that the vehicles need to meet emissions standards. Right?
Well, that's the current law. So you don't necessarily need to reiterate it, but that's the existing law. So we currently require all.
So even the ones that the 12 vehicles still need to meet the emissions standards.
Yeah, they would not be exempt from those emission standard requirements.
But they're not going to get tested.
Correct. Under the bill. Yeah.
Representative White and then Representative McCoy.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going back to what Representative Couch spoke of, that we heard some testimony that this one particular auto manufacturer in, I think, the Milton area had said that, and I feel like I recall it a little differently. I thought they said, we are constructing this completely original vehicle. It doesn't have a VIN number, but we will be using a modern Ford motor, or I think Representative Couch said it had California standards. I thought they had said a Ford motor, it's, up to date, it has all the emissions. It passes emissions requirements nationally because it's a modern motor coming from Ford. So I think that assuaged our concerns that these vehicles would be putting out more emissions than were allowable. But I think what I'm hearing is that, or being reminded, that was one particular manufacturer, doesn't really speak for others. And so I want to make that point. And then also, the committee had discussed requiring a visual emissions inspection, not the OBD system, because again, relying on testimony that said whatever motor they're using somehow is not able to be measured with this OBD system inspection. And what I'm hearing you say is that modern motors all should be complying with these OBD systems inspections. So perhaps there was a little information missing in the testimony that we heard, where we understood that these motors would not be able to comply because of the OBD system inspection.
I think it really depends. I mean, correct me, Deirdre, but my understanding is like there are for purchase for like these types of hot rods or specialty vehicles, you can purchase, engine systems and emission control systems that are certified, that do meet standards. And then there are others that don't. And that's part of the manufacturer, like the engine manufacturer instructions will identify which of those are like certified and could meet the standards if they're, installed consistent with the instructions. And then there's others that don't. So I think it does depend on, what the manufacturer is using in terms of actual equipment, because there is equipment that can be installed that would meet the standards. So it's not an impossibility. It could be, belts and suspenders to just clarify that that's the intent, that these vehicles do, meet the emission standards, that we're not somehow exempting them from that just because they don't have to meet inspections. But Deirdre, did you want to add to that at all in terms of the?
Yeah, and I do just want to clarify that, modern engines, vehicles that meet federal emission standards or California emission standards are required to have the onboard diagnostic system. But like Rachel said, there are some engines, and I think it was Ford, for these types of hot rods that do come out of California that are certified. They do exist.
And do you feel like a visual emissions inspection, it has any value? I mean, my assumption is that it's probably not as good as a full emissions inspection, but it's better than no emissions inspection. But does a visual inspection do anything?
I think it's pretty limited. It first depends on who's doing the inspection. And if they're really well versed with emission controls, especially on, newer modern vehicles, the technology is really hard to keep up with. Looking at a catalytic converter, just looking at it, you can't necessarily tell if all of the substrate has been removed, because it may look intact, but you don't know if it's actually functioning, if it's just hollow. So there are things like that you can't necessarily tell. You might have some suspicions from a visual inspection, but it's not nearly as good as the onboard diagnostic testing.
Thank you.
Representative McCoy?
Yes, so I first want to state that I believe we heard testimony that these cars start at 6 $600,000 to purchase. That's the starting point. So I think that people who are purchasing a vehicle at $600,000 are, they'll probably, and using it only one day per week and not registering more than 12 per year. I think I'm perfectly fine with the language as it is. I don't think that this is going to skew our emissions one way or the other. I mean, if somebody spends starting point of $600,000 a year, that has to meet the California emission standards for the motor, which is, the emission standard that we are complying with. I don't see a problem with any of the language that we have currently before us.
Representative Burke is up next, and Representative Peter.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, just to clarify again. So all of these would have to meet California emission standard to be sold in Vermont or no?
Well, yes, but there actually is a federal, I think this is in the legislative study that DMV put together, but there is a federal pathway to get an exemption from kind of less stringent emissions requirements. It's called the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, known as the FAST Act. And that's an avenue available to low volume manufacturers. If they meet certain criteria, they can get those vehicles that would have kind of this federal exemption. And correct me, Deirdre, but I believe if a vehicle, if a manufacturer had gone through its FAST Act process, that vehicle could also be sold in Vermont. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think if they follow that practice, the EPA at the federal level exempts them from state emissions inspections.
So I just want to mention it's not when you were asking if it's all California emission standards, it would be yes for this federal pathway for low volume manufacturers.
Thank you.
How many of these are registered in the state of Vermont?
None right now, right?
No. There's not, right? So this is a theoretical. Thank you.
I do have a question. Did you, when you had looked at the bill, or when you were involved in helping, or you had your comments piece, did you expect that it was a total of 12 period? Or was the idea 12 this year? If they were to build up to 12 next year, you'd have 12 renewals next year and you might build up to 12 the next day, that it would be stacking, that over a period of years, it could go from 12 to technically, I guess, since there's only one right now being proposed, but it could go from 12 to 24 to 36. Or was the idea that you thought it would only be first come, first served to 12 of them? Or is it a stacking every year? You have 12 plus last year's renewal of 12, potentially renewal of 12 previous ones.
Well, I think our feedback was related to a lot of the proponents of the change were looking at the California SB 100, which had an annual cap. And so the 12 number would be the same proportion number of vehicles in Vermont as was in California, if that makes sense. So I think it was an annual cap. But again, we weren't advocating for 12 or any vehicles. I think we were trying to advocate for consistency, given that was the basis for the bill. But I think it was a 12 annual. Is that right, Deirdre?
Yes.
I understand the 12. I'm saying we've gone through the year and now it's next year. Are you thinking there will be 12 more on top of the other 12?
That was our understanding that, yeah, it would be 12.
Because the question from our ledge council was, is it intended that there would be 12 only forever, or it would be 12 plus 12 plus 12 as years go by?
I think if my understanding was the intent was to track SB 100, and if that's the case, it would be an annual 12 each year.
Funny how that answer doesn't really answer it.
No, it does. She said,
But you're re-registering, you have to get
My
re-registered.
understanding of the intent is,
You know what
but
I'm
again, I
saying?
want to be clear, it's not our intent, but the intent, my understanding of the intent of that number was that it was a 12 annual.
Your 10 would be 0.
Right, I understand that, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that individual is. Renewables or control renewables on top of that.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that. That's a question that's on the list, registered from our legislative council. And the idea of, we require visual inspections of emissions on antiques and sports car or exemptions, specialty exemptions. Do you know, why this would be any different than that? We require, on the side-by-side, we had emissions, a visual emissions inspection on antiques. Why we wouldn't want to require to stay consistent with that same piece? Any thoughts on the difference between having that visual emissions or not?
Do you have thoughts on that, Deirdre?
I mean, assuming antiques are vehicles that are older, that typically don't have modern emission controls, maybe that could be some difference.
Right, that these are actually going to be newly manufactured versus an antique, which actually.
Well,
couldn't
antiques
easily-
and kit cars in our specialty side by side, for whatever reason, it requires or still has a visual inspection of emissions. But this language would not have a visual inspection of language. And I think it was being suggested that we might want to try to be consistent. But I'm just wondering whether there's a reason we should or shouldn't do that. We may hear that from over there.
Yeah, I mean, from
Representative-
the Air Division would certainly support any type of inspection, in general.
Okay.
But I think your testimony sort of said the visual doesn't quite do it. And I think for us, the visual was more like mechanically just checking the vehicle, and that, antiques don't require emission standards. And in this case, these specialty vehicles wouldn't require emission checks. But the question is, do we still do a visual?
You can tell if they're
Mechanically
muffler.
visual.
You can tell
Yeah,
if
I
they
think-
removed any of the system.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the comments that we gave to DMV, and I think this might have made it into the DMV report, was, from our perspective, there's no point in exempting a vehicle that's subject to emission standards, because then you're just removing your ability to know. But I think that was part of our testimony, that if it's required to meet emission standards, you might as well do the emissions inspection. But I think that was our position, when we gave testimony previously. But as I mentioned, we're not, I think with the limitations that are in the bill, we're not objecting.
Representative White?
I mean, just to summarize, I'm hearing that requiring these cars to have an inspection would be the best way to go. They've got modern engines. They have to be complying with the Clean Air Act. According to your understanding, they have these OBD systems anyway. No, that's wrong.
You can't plug them in.
They chose.
Well, they don't currently aren't built with the plug. That's the difference. They don't have the plug-in.
And if they don't have the plug-in, there's
I'm
this
sorry.
FAST Act. There's this federal act called the FAST Act, which does allow a particular manufacturer to get a waiver. Am I understanding that?
Yes, that's correct. There's a process that allows, if certain criteria are met, that allows vehicle manufacturers that produce a low volume. I think it's selling not more than 5,000 motor vehicles would qualify as a low volume manufacturer to get this kind of waiver of those requirements.
Sorry.
I am all set. Thank you.
I have one more horrible question, I guess. How does the air quality division view motorcycle emissions and inspections differently than pleasure vehicles? And is it measured, how does it fit into your work, or is it sort of viewed the same way? Is there any different approach to motorcycle emissions than there is to a pleasure vehicle or pleasure car? And at all? Are they handled anything different within your compliance with the EPA within these inspection programs that you mentioned and whether we are or not able to comply with approved state implementation plans and things of that nature. Where does motorcycles fit in?
So with the EPA regulations, they're not subject to the emissions inspection program that we implement. I know I think motorcycles have come up recently. I think it's more about noise emissions. And that piece is outside of our jurisdiction.
Okay.
Well, we've had quite a bit of discussion. We have our own emissions here from all of this discussion, I think. So it's been pretty good.
Other section or questions that we had left on specialty vehicles or other section? Some question about the waterways, but that's not your air quality is a long ways from water, I guess. I think we're all set then. I thank you again. I apologize for cutting you guys off earlier when you were here last week. Thank you for being flexible and coming back. We appreciate your time and committee.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you for listening and for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was discussion on that. And I thought,
For a theoretical exercise like that.
But I think the main thing is that it's a good idea to put it every other year inspection.
I didn't necessarily hear that.
Well,
But they would have to prove that it's not gonna cause air
Also,
quality to
the
go
other
backwards.
aspect of it is the cost, cost can mount if you don't
Yeah.
take care of something in a timely way. So if we were going to do it to save people money, it might not be.
Is there anything other than to say that you can check off, are we done with Smuggler's Notch? Anybody?
Never.
Are we not done with the Smuggler's Notch, section 8? We're not ready to thumbs up section 8?
There we are.
Yeah, the only question was with the signage, right? I think we're fine with the pines, but is Damien gonna take something up on that?
That's-
So,
You said something
Yeah.
about
Had to leave.
You said it was just a pathway, it was just a dirt road, right? Is that you who said that? Who said that? Smuggler's Path.
Oh, that was, the guy was,
Oh, that was,
Bill's, yeah.
I had never thought about that, as, being close to Canada.
Yeah, but that's, oh, the Green Mountain Boys.
Oh, that's, yeah, so it's a
Green
whole
Mountain
thing.
Boys used to all the time. Yeah.
And they used to stuff liquor behind the big boulders and stuff like that.
Back and forth.
Legends, country legends, urban legends, I don't know, which they're all over the place. Well, without him here, we're not gonna be able to move
yeah,
our
so we can't
section
do
forward.
that,
So I do think that this is an interesting conversation about whether or not one of the reasons we can't have an approved state implementation plan with the EPA is because we do not require that you have an inspection in order to get your registration.
Well, I didn't hear them say that's not why we're approved. They just said that makes it really hard to get approved.
But if we did it, then
That would help them a lot,
it
yeah.
might be in better graces with
Well,
that.
I think,
One of these
I
things
think what
that's
I heard
required.
that 20 states do. And then then there was something about 26 and 7, and I don't know what those
Some-
numbers
some
were.
states
Couldn't
don't.
answer it. Some
Would
states don't do it at all.
They don't have to.
Right,
They're
yeah.
not.
They
in
don't
there.
have the, air quality issues that we have.
So
We're in
But
ozone
Connecticut
transit.
Connecticut presumably does. So I'd like to know more about what Connecticut does. And is that something that we could just replicate here?
Well,
they have a whole heck of a lot more vehicles.
They-
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it that they do?
one thing they do is you can't inspect without you can't register without inspecting. So I think this is good data telling us if we're gonna do it for electric vehicles, we should do it for the other vehicles. It's only gonna make their life better and possibly position us, if we wanna go to every other year, be in a better position.
They could register without an emissions inspection for Connecticut.
That's true. That's,
Not in.
they only do emissions
Emissions
inspections.
inspection, that's
Yes,
all they do.
right. But we do an emission inspection too, in our safety
In
inspection.
our inspection, our yearly inspection.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that they do.
The Commissioner would like to add
It's
something.
I just want to jump in. So you can register your vehicle before you get your inspection. On a new registration. So you have 15 days we allow. So we don't, it's not a, on that first one,
You don't have to show up with it, yeah,
you have 15 days. Yeah, inspection.
okay. But
Then
the
you gotta
following
get followed
year,
up.
the following year, you can go ahead and register. And nobody is verifying whether you've inspected,
Correct, they're separate.
yeah. But, and then we did hear testimony that now with the new computer system, because we asked the question on electric vehicles, if you're not gonna allow registration with electric vehicles unless you show evidence you've been inspected, that's,
In this,
you're capable
this
of
may be
doing that.
a conversation maybe next year. I would say, for at least from the administration side on this, I would just advise, as A and R kind of alluded, the STIP that Vermont has never been approved since the 1980s. So I would just layer that in this conversation of, that's what happened again.
I mean, just to continue the discussion, to be fair, if electric vehicles must show that they are inspected to get registration, I don't understand why the same wouldn't be applied for gas vehicles.
And I don't want to get in conversation, disagreement with it, I'm just layering that. I think the premise of the MBUF is that as the financial kind of grip on there, and I'm not disagreeing with you, we haven't broached the subject. The piece about inspection, connected registration was a meeting that a staff member of mine had maybe 2 months ago, so this is all not enough time for us to even discuss it internally. So, but it's not that I'm not disagreeing with you or saying one way or the other.
We have an unusual opening of
Yeah.
committee discussion time right now, since we do not have particular agenda items, so we're not asking you to comment on the policy or to make your official stand, but that's better, we still have
Is
discussion.
that a mandate, or I thought people could take a picture of their odometer and download that? Did we get rid of that?
I think it's still
No, no, yeah.
a possibility, but it's not yet.
Did it leave our house?
No, we didn't have it.
Just, okay. Okay.
So two things, because on the one hand, smugglers
Agenda
not.
67.
We're talking about Smuggler's Notch and then we're talking about acceptance. So on Smuggler's Notch, I am in support of adding a line just on that signage requirement. We talked about it. I think a lot of us were in favor of that. The DMV said, we will take care of that, but just putting something in writing in the bill, I think would be a good idea. Switching gears to inspections, I am in full support of Representative Pouch's suggestion that we consider, if not now, because I'm hearing the commissioner say we are not quite ready for that, but next year to look at requiring inspections for vehicles that are registered in Vermont. I think it's an equity thing. It's also, we have a terrible enforcement problem. And why do we have a law that we are not enforcing, or that we're going to enforce for some drivers, but not all? Let's be consistent. And I think it sounds like it would do good in terms of how the EPA is looking at us, which, whether that's important or not, but I'll stop there.
So should we put some intent language into the bill that we're not gonna, basically. Somebody will look into the possibility of doing that and the impact on the emissions. Whatever, your standard, your emissions, whether you're compliant or not, or how compliant you might be. And also the equity issue.
So I'd rather just charge the DMV with looking into the possibility of doing emissions prior. That's one of the things you need to do prior to registration. I think they would have now until December to figure that one out. And as far as the signage, my understanding from yesterday is someone from DMV said there is a sign already. that they have. So once again, I don't understand. It's like we put so much stuff in law that it's already being done. They already have the sign there, the lighted sign stays there. Roads,
I think it has the wrong amount though.
well, now.
Yeah, so it has to be
It's not wrong,
lower.
it's not wrong right now.
Yeah, and it's, I think
Somebody's
they'll
gotta
love
pay
to
over
sit in
the-
their little
the amount
booth
put
and
up.
change the signage.
20,000.
It's like, okay, there's a sign at exit 7, you know, it says something
What, no,
about
it's a physical
Santa
sign.
is on his
You're
way.
talking about a permanent sign.
Yeah, a permanent sign, but I thought there was a permanent sign. I think maybe we're- I don't know.
There are, they're both.
Yeah.
We're gonna find that out on our field.
So I'm
trip.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
so that would have to be changed.
Yes, but I mean, wouldn't you think they would change it if it says 400 and now it's gonna be
Well,
10,000?
no, absolutely, but so what's the point of putting it in?
I don't see a point of putting it in when we have this.
It doesn't hurt you.
Well, yeah, but they have one up that says 2,400 now.
Yeah.
Reprogram that. They'll reprogram that to 10,000.
Stick another one in the ground.
Put some duct tape on it.
10,000?
10,000.
Right.
Spray paint.
They'll change the electric one,
Think
so,
it's overkill, we just overkill.
all right.
Yes.
Stupid drivers, they can't reach C5 signs going out there anyway.
Well, they've proven that.
No doubt about it.
They're having a hard time getting around the chicane.
Well, some streets you have so many signs that they don't pay attention to any of them because they're coming at them so fast.
You mean like speed limit signs every, Representative Lally, you mean like the speed limit signs that are required to be posted every so often that we're not able to adjust to? I understand people have trouble reading that one. You know, it's required on the interstate to be
Yeah.
posted within every 5 miles or less, I think it is. And within a mile of each entrance and exit way as well. It's required to be there and they are
And there's a
there. I
work
mean,
zone speed limit.
I've seen some house plates flying by me on 89.
We think we're gonna get them to change the sign. We sure as hell couldn't get them to put a camera up in a work zone. So with that, we are adjourned until 20 minutes after floor, where we will pick up and learn what they have next to report about 10-year trends in fees related to their top 10 fees and what has gone up and gone down and what their analysis is starting to show and what they do about it when they do.